As everybody knows, Kubernetes has solved every problem in the world. We now have complete peace between developers and operations. Database and storage people get together in perfect synchronicity, and networking is no longer a problem. Well, not really, right?
No, absolutely not.
I'm Stephen Foskett from Gestalt IT, and we are here at Cloud Field Day, and I'm catching up with some of the delegates for some of these Gestalt IT tech talks. Tell me about tell me about yourself, and then we can tell the world about what's wrong with Kubernetes.
Well, for all your viewers, my name is Jon Hildebrand. You may have seen some prior Tech Field Day videos in which I was a delegate, and then I was a presenter, and now I'm back on the delegate side of the equation. So we're moving back and forth between the different tables that you've established in your events.
And throughout that time, we've been having you come to Field Day here, basically in the Kubernetes era. And as I said, I mean, it's all about Kubernetes, right? Kubernetes fix everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and one of the things that we see, and you can always go back to some of the infamous Dilbert comics, where they just throw out buzzwords. And Kubernetes has turned almost into a meme in and of itself. It's a buzzword. People struggle to understand exactly what it brings to the table and immediately think that it's going to solve all of your problems. When in fact, it's another layer of infrastructure management. It's another layer of development management that you have to worry about. It's just more worry on top of your existing systems that you have within your environment. So just take it for what it is, which is a better way to do an abstract infrastructure for developers moving forward. That's really what it is. It's not going to solve every immediate problem that you have. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the goal really with Kubernetes was never to basically be a complete software platform. I think the goal was, as you said, to take infrastructure, specifically with containerized infrastructure, and make it so that it can be integrated and programmatically controlled and standardized and specified in a way that just sort of works. And honestly, Kubernetes works pretty well for that because containers are freaking awesome. Ask an old school IT ops sysadmin kind of person. Wow, yes, Kubernetes, everything should run in containers in my opinion. And if everything's running in containers, well, then you need something that's going to decide sort of where to spin those containers up and how to configure those containers and how to tear them back down again and how to connect them to things like storage and networking. And that's what Kubernetes does, right?
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. It's nothing, really, to boil it down, it's a glorified orchestrator between all those different infrastructure stacks that have been basically taken one step further from an abstraction layer to make it easier to manage those layers and to be able to easily allow programmers to access those layers moving forward. So at that point, it's really nothing more than, honestly, like I said, it's an orchestrator. That's really all it does. It's basically the thing that delivers the packages to the door, as a bad analogy for what exactly it's supposed to do for your containerized environment.
But I think that a lot of people talk about it as if it's something more than that, right? I mean, I definitely think a lot of C-level IT people think that Kubernetes is the new VMware. I think that a lot of C-level IT people also think that Kubernetes gives me my own cloud. These aren't really accurate.
No, absolutely not. They're, again, abstraction layers, orchestration layers. That's what they basically provide to the overall business. And what that does is just help jumpstart application development. Now, I will go and tend to disagree a little bit that everything should be a container. Not everything is necessarily needs to be a container. Ask someone who's done a lot of mainframe development, for an example, or a lot of large organizations that have these big iron machines that are still sitting back there 30, 40 years later.
Hey man, they got containers too.
Well, You can add a lot of container layers to the front ends, to the middleware of those particular systems, but I don't think you're ever going to fully replace the mainframe that's running the back end on those particular systems. So, but it's one of those sorts of things that if not everything is going to necessarily be containerized, then you're going to end up needing to still also provide those layers of infrastructure outside of Kubernetes. So that's where it comes into play, where it's not necessarily going to solve every single IT problem that you have out there. You're still going to run into, as you know with your storage systems, a tried and true storage problem. So you're still going to see those in the environment, and you're still going to need people who are going to be able to react to those systems. There's just another layer to have to worry about in the organization with Kubernetes.
And it is good that Kubernetes allows us to standardize systems, to standardize the vocabulary and the interfaces for these things. And I think that one of the things that Kubernetes really has helped with, let's talk about storage, is by providing a standard way that we can provision storage into containers. Now, Kubernetes didn't really do that. The storage companies and the storage developers did that, but now we have it. And it means that we can basically have a regular way that we're plugging storage into containerized applications. The same thing with networking, right? We needed to have networking overlays. We needed to have flexibility. We needed to have ways of specifying interfaces and configuring those interfaces and plumbing them out to the internet or wherever they're going to go. And now we have that with Kubernetes. Is that kind of how you see it, as a way to specify infrastructure and sort of a framework into which other things are plugged instead of the framework itself?
Yeah, you use the word plug, and I consider this to be a pluggable infrastructure, basically. So you have the boiled down, simplified calls that a developer would need to do to make to a storage environment, to a network environment, to make these things happen for plumbing and for just the overall, where's your data going to be stored when it comes to these containerized applications. So for me, the key term is pluggable, and that generally means that you're trying to simplify down access to those particular infrastructure components.
So what else does Kubernetes mean to you then? I mean, and how are people using it wrong?
Well, one of the things that I see is, especially from those who are heavily invested in virtualization, trying to assume that virtualization equals containerization. Mm-hmm. That you can just take an application and change essentially
instead of running it on a hypervisor, you're running it in a container.
Yeah. Well, let's not get into the fact that there are different projects in the whole CNCF that allow you to do virtualization within containers at the same time.
Or containers within virtualization.
Yeah, you are correct on that one too. So basically, at the end of the day, what you're going to see is a lot of places make mistakes in trying to move applications and just change the clothes that essentially they're wearing. And that's not necessarily how containerization and the Kubernetes systems are ultimately going to be able to successfully move that application to more of a cloud-native application approach.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's actually really important to understand, is that just containerizing something doesn't actually make it cloud native. In fact, it doesn't at all make it cloud native by having it running in a container or having it orchestrated by Kubernetes at all. And yet I think some people think that that's kind of what we're doing here, right?
Yeah, well, you fail to realize when it comes to the term cloud native, you've got things like self-healing capabilities, and you've got auto-scaling capabilities that are built into the application that call upon the infrastructure to make those things happen. And you just can't move a virtual machine to a container and expect those things to magically appear. Those are code segments that have to be changed within the major components of that particular application, and things broken out into parts that make sense from not only from a business perspective, but also from that particular code perspective to try to get towards that cloud native capability.
Yeah, I mean, they call it refactoring,
Yes.
to make the applications more flexible, scalable, microservices based, that sort of thing. And similarly, you can't just take a virtual machine and dump it into a container and expect it to work, because a lot of the things that, well, basically VMware is a big company and they did a lot of things with their hypervisor based solution. And I say that, it's not about the hypervisor, it's about the entire solution that they put together. Many of those things are duplicated in modern containerized environments, but many of them are not, and you still need external components and services to deliver all that.
Yeah, as an example, we're going to see later this week Tanzu, and that is VMware's Kubernetes abstraction, utilizing what we in the virtualization community have known for years under the guise of storage, network, compute, and memory. So we're going to see more about what Tanzu brings to the table, and likely we're going to hear the Kubernetes word over and over and over again during those particular presentations.
Well, I guarantee we're going to hear it over and over again throughout all the Cloud Field Day presentations, because again, you can naysay Kubernetes, but on the flip side, it is absolutely got the kind of momentum that very, very few things have, right? I mean, especially in cloud native, but in the enterprise as well. Kubernetes really is everywhere.
Yes. And it's not going away anytime soon. And in fact, I would go one step further and start to talk to specifically some of my brethren from the virtualization community. Now's the time to start learning about Kubernetes. If you want to take your infrastructure career to another level and take it to a new arc that is going to work for the next 5, 10 plus years in the way application development is going, with cloud native components being added to applications left and right, Kubernetes is going to be where you're going to be spending a lot of time making sure that that infrastructure is working well from that abstraction layer.
Yeah. And I have to say, I've been pretty critical of Kubernetes implementations overall for not actually having much in the way of storage services and networking services built into them. And I think a lot of people just assume, well, it's going to run, if it runs on Kubernetes on my laptop, it's going to run in the cloud and everything's going to be fine. That is absolutely not true. But at the same time, and I think another thing that Kubernetes has done is it actually has brought a bit of a flavor of infrastructure and operations into the developer world. Because as people, as IT developers are trying to roll things out in Kubernetes, they're starting to learn about some of the fundamental concepts of IT infrastructure. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. Especially when it comes to networking. I'll pick on networking as an example. The things like ingress and being able to handle the way that network communications can happen to a containerized set of applications is paramount these days to allowing you to run these applications pretty much anywhere, and understanding where those connection points are for the network plumbing to make all the proper calls happen for your application to function correctly. So I would say that yes, we are exactly on that particular trajectory, and it's definitely one of these things that it's time to start learning it.
So if somebody wants to learn it, what would you suggest? Where should they start to learn Kubernetes?
Well, there's plenty of places out there, especially from the Google projects, because not everybody knows, but it spawned from internal Google projects. That's where we got Kubernetes in the first place. And so there's a lot of documentation available from Google itself for the open source community for Kubernetes. Plenty of paid subscription locations like Pluralsight and a Cloud Guru and places like that have these sorts of learning systems in place, especially with now the CNCF has official certification guides available for these sorts of programs. So working through those just to get it up and running and understanding. And I think in some particular cases, I like baptism by fire. So trying some of the projects that exist out there, like Minikube or Micro K8s, for those K8s, short for Kubernetes. So yeah, there's plenty of ways to get your hands on the technology and to start to experiment with the technology, but there's also plenty of formalized education now wrapping around the technology as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And organizations and events, you mentioned the CNCF. KubeCon is a wonderful conference, a lot of great people there. A lot of it's going to be pretty advanced if you're just getting into Kubernetes, but at the same time, like you said, you jump into the pool and you start swimming. And so again, I know another thing that a lot of people have done is Kelsey Hightower in the building Kubernetes from nothing. That's another great way to learn about it. So thank you so much. Before we go, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where can we find you? Do you have a podcast? Do you have a blog? Do you write on LinkedIn? What do you do?
Well, I tend to do more things on LinkedIn now, so you can find me at Jon Hildebrand. So that's Jon, not John, Hildebrand. Easy to find me on LinkedIn with that as the URL for and I nowadays am starting to get back into writing, so I'll start to do some things with LinkedIn itself. As you've mentioned, that's a great place to reestablish a blog. So that's where you'll tend to find me, is hanging out on LinkedIn.
And as for me, you'll see me hosting the On-Premise IT podcast, as well as the weekly Gestalt IT news rundown. You can find more of these tech talks videos at YouTube/Gestalt IT video or gestaltit.com. We're also here for Cloud Field Day. If you go to techfieldday.com or YouTube/Tech Field Day, you can learn more about that. Thanks for joining us, and I hope you enjoyed this tech talk where we look at Kubernetes.